Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to our AHEAD webinar entitled Recalibrating Your Public Cloud Journey. Today's event is led by two subject matter experts from AHEAD, each bringing a distinct point of view on the cloud journey. We're joined by AHEAD CTO, Eric Kaplan, and our practice manager in charge of cloud management and automation, Nick Colyer. Before I turn it over to Eric to review the agenda and kick things off, just a few logistical items. So first of all, your microphones are muted to make sure that everyone can have a good experience and hear okay. We will do some Q&A at the end of the session. So again, if you have any questions throughout, submit them using the Q&A tab, not the chat tab, which we will not be checking. So we won't be seeing you on the chat tab. And you can find the Q&A tab in the upper right corner of your WebEx screen. That way we can summarize and ask some questions of these two panelists at the end. We are recording the briefing, so we'll be sure to share a link to that recording afterwards in our post-event follow-up. So without further delay, let me turn it over to Eric to kick things off.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it. Going to go over the agenda really quickly. First, I'm going to go over a couple of slides which really articulate what we're seeing in the enterprise. So I'm going to talk about, how we see customers either recalibrating or calibrating towards a journey to the public cloud, the current state of what we're seeing in the enterprise and different phases of adoption, and then an operational model that we believe makes sense and we're advocating that our clients adopt. Then I'll hand it over to Nick, and Nick is going to really go over the core pillars that we believe are key when looking at moving workloads and applications to the public cloud. And then I'm going to wrap up, and Nick and I are going to talk about 8 lessons learned that we've seen through these journeys with our clients. And then time pending, we'll make it open for some Q&A. So, right now, what we're seeing with customers is two distinct motions. Sometimes they're within the same organization, but many customers are looking at leveraging the public cloud for two key reasons. One is to build new applications in order to drive innovation, which ultimately the goal there is to grow revenue, or really migrate existing applications and workloads with an effort to mitigate cost. And these things can work well in conjunction with each other, but they're really two different motions at the end of the day. So what we're going to talk about today are some of the things that you need to put in place for, achieving both of these outcomes. When we look at the current state of what's happening in the enterprise, I believe there's two distinct efforts going on. Some organizations are in process of moving to the public cloud already. However, they've kind of jumped in and they may lack an established operating model, which we'll talk about a little later. They've never implemented the right foundation. They may be facing security and compliance issues, and spend might be out of control, and it really shouldn't be. Spend is something that can be managed very easily. On the other end, we have clients that are really looking to embark on their move to the public cloud, but they may be unsure of where to begin and they feel behind. And the good news is many of them want to learn the lessons that their peers and predecessors have already gone through, and they're looking to implement this foundation with the right security and compliance controls from the beginning. And team structure and operational model and organizational structure is really top of mind. So, neither one of these is bad. It's just the state of what we see out there in the marketplace. What we do believe is that there's different phases of adoption in both of these different camps of enterprises. And no matter where you are, we really believe that to have a successful outcome at the end of the day, this is an ongoing journey that requires a bit of strategy and roadmap work. And we're not going to get into the details of each of these phases today, but as you can see, there's really a lot at stake here and a lot that encompasses this journey. And we believe that, spending a little bit of time on strategy and roadmap is key, and once you have that nailed, You need to move into a design and plan to get that foundation that Nick's going to talk about built right, and then moving on to application migration, deployment, and ongoing management. So these are things that we dig deep into with customers on a daily basis, and outside of this webinar, we'd be happy to go and drill into each of these sub areas. What we really believe is to get this journey off on the right foot, you need to put in place the right operating model and really the right team structure and organizational structure. And this can't be a part-time job for you, and we really advocate establishing the right cloud charter first and foremost within your organization. And that charter has to be supported by a key executive sponsor and key roles within the organization. We really need a product manager understanding what the requirements are from the business, and then working with various subject matter experts from an infrastructure perspective, a lead architecture perspective, a security and applications perspective, and then an operational perspective. And this really formulates the core nexus of your cloud initiative and your cloud team. And this team needs to have an engineering side of it, which is focused on things like infrastructure, operations, security, migration, and a business side to it, which is really focused on governance, finance, and how to market the cloud initiatives that are going on within your organization. And this is a very simplistic model in a single slide, but really we can't just pay attention to the technology side of things, and we can't just think about the business side of things. We need to pull these together and have a dedicated team that's focused on this. So I'm now going to hand this over to Nick, and he's going to really jump into the key pillars of building your public cloud operating model.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. And, just to hit on one thing, what's key, and, I've spent a lot of time this past year just out in the field with clients, and as Eric said, some people are starting on this public cloud journey, and what we've also seen is we've had this notion of a public cloud reboot. And a lot of customers are like, well, how do I avoid the reboot? And that's ultimately where we sort of look deep at the operating model, which has expanded and changed over the year, and that's where we came up with these, 11 pillars really that we use that we ultimately use to kind of help customers onboard public cloud and operate it successfully. So whether you're an Azure shop or an Amazon shop, this framework applies to you. And I'll start off, and I'll just hit each of these. We could spend an hour on every single one of these bullets, but what we thought we would do today is just give a 2-minute overview on each one of these. And so to begin with, just education and current state review. When we go and help a customer onboard Azure, AWS, or any of the clouds out there, we have to really take a look first and foremost at the current data center. What do we have? What are the enterprise operational practices that we've already formulated there? Which ones do we want to keep and transition to public cloud, and which ones do we want to challenge? But more importantly, in this phase, we have an ability to do continuous education. So this isn't just when, say, you engage a company like Ahead to come in and help educate you on Azure or AWS. This is your plan for continuous education. We see a lot of things now, hackathons, code review Fridays, town halls. How am I constantly communicating back to the teams, whether it's the business, whether it's IT themselves? Everybody is hungry for this. I think of the workshops we've done recently, and we sort of put the agenda out, and then we get like 50, 60 names, 1 out of 10, and we're like, okay, well, we're not going to quite get through these 11 pillars if 60 people are in the room, but how do we then offer a second piece of just continuous education to those people, because everybody is hungry for it? The next thing that we really need to look at is what's the account structure. It's not a case of just swiping a credit card in Amazon or Azure. It's a case of, okay, well, what's the right account structure and my plan for adding new accounts, organizations, subscriptions, depending on which public cloud provider you use. So this is all things like role-based access controls. Well, hey, this business group wants to do X, Y, Z. Do I split up a new data center in the cloud for them? That's one concept we see a lot. And then who's going to get the bill? I think this is so important, and just onboarding and moving an application to the public cloud and getting your first bill and knowing what to do with it and how it works through finance has been eye-opening to a lot of customers there as well. So getting that right is important. Then we have our network. This is obviously core, and again, it's a network design, but it's also a plan for when do I add additional networks, when do I add additional subnets. We have to get some things right, first of all, like connectivity to on-premises. is a site-to-site VPN okay, or do I need to use more of a direct connect or express route type connection because I expect to be pumping data back and forth to the cloud, on a pretty frequent basis. And security is, as you'll see, we have a section on security later on, but it's wrapped into every single one of these 11 pillars. So how am I going to secure the network, the front end, the back end? What's my security and compliance policies around this? What about things like DDoS protection that are there as well, available in the public cloud world? Then if we think of VMs, and we'll hit to the next slide here, ultimately a lot of people that are moving to Azure AWS are probably coming from the VMware world, right? Or maybe you still have some physical servers lying around there. But it's really interesting, when you're in a VMware team, your conversation is around CPU, memory, and disk. And if somebody wants to size an app, you're just looking at CPU and memory. In the public cloud world, whether it's Amazon or Azure, we have things like T-series and B-series, depending on which provider you use. And those are burstable type instances. Those can be used for production workloads and save you a tremendous amount of money if they fit for the right purpose. We have instances that are compute optimized, memory optimized, GPU optimized. And so it's not a case of I just pick up my VM and I size it exactly the same when I go to the public cloud. I have to tune and cost optimize the instances I use. And this has been it's really interesting because a lot of people I think, okay, I just go there, I'll spin up a VM, but there's a lot of extra really cool things you can do and get creative with the public cloud. At the same time, we still have to think about things like naming, tagging, what's our patch management for OSs. Those things don't go away because we went to public cloud, but they can be much easier with some of the tool sets available out there. One thing I will say is, naming conventions continue to be the biggest topic in our workshops. Sometimes, people want to debate a naming convention for 1 or 2 hours, and I would say that that's not the most important thing in getting to a public cloud. Just, you can pick one pretty quickly and move on. Not everybody has to get their way there. Same with storage as well. If we move on to the next one. There's a lot of options here, right? We used to add in disks to our virtual machines, but there's also things like all the object storage available, whether it's blob storage in Azure or S3 buckets that you can provision in AWS. We've got all different things like, how do we add a SIF share when we're in the public cloud? How do we use, queuing type storage systems and all the various database options available to you as well. And this brings another challenge, right? How does your, is the storage team that typically is managed enterprise disk on premises, are they going to be involved here? Certainly they would want, a lot of the same things apply around access, encryption, tooling, knowing what's out there, who owns what storage, those things still apply in the public cloud. The next pillar that you see is really around recommended application architectures, and we sort of cover this after we've done some base network design, VMs and storage, because it's good to have that baseline before you start to design your application. And this is a key phase because we always try to move customers when they go into the public cloud to pick 1 or 2 applications. And ideally, let's pick an app that maybe is more of a lift and shift style app, and let's also pick an app that potentially uses some of the platform services out there. This will give you the greatest experience in how to, architect and optimize an application for the public cloud. So if we look at infrastructure services, that goes back to things like VMs, the network, the storage, size and requirements. How do we do that? But then we have all these platform services available in AWS and Azure, whether we're using app services in Azure, whether we're using Elastic Beanstalk, whether we're using Lambda functions. There's a whole host of technologies that we can utilize in addition to our old way of doing things. And so there's a lot of things that open up to people here as they get to this application architecture. At the same time, again, you see that security is wrapped into this phase as well. Then we still have a few more to cover here from a security aspect. We've got identity management, if we hit that one. And again, there's a few things to think about here. We have a shared security model whenever we engage one of the public cloud providers. So there's things they're responsible for, and there's things we're responsible for. And some of the things that are key is just the control plane itself. Who has access to what in the public cloud? I heard the other day the term, a subscription admin in Azure is kind of the modern day AD admin. Like it's the same as giving somebody a domain admin access, right? Those were things that you only gave to a few people. So it's very important, in both clouds, what is the right, access controls that you can put in place, and then how are we logging this? How are we logging all of the activity that's going on in the public cloud domain? And then how do we account for things like Active Directory domain services in the public cloud as well? Are we setting up a domain controller out there? Are we leveraging some of the new PaaS type services that the public cloud providers have available? Security, again, is just a huge topic for us in the public cloud. On the right, we have our regulatory requirements, FedRAMP, NIST, PII, HIPAA, all the things that we have to account for today. And how do we take those, governance and security controls at the high level and turn them into something real world down in say, AWS and Azure? What is our actual control that we're implementing? What do I need to go in and check? Where are the logs today? How do I give access, And a big thing is the security teams themselves. Often they've got tools that they used to use in on-premises today, whether it's image, analysis tools like Qualys to check if you're at the latest patch revision level, if it's some of the SIM and login tools that are out there, if it's things like Splunk. How do all of those play into us? Do we decide to use public cloud native tools, or do we continue to extend some of those on-premises tools that we've already built capability around to the public cloud? And that brings me on to really a governance blueprint as well. And we spent a lot of time trying to think about governance in AWS and Azure this year, and what is our governance blueprint, right? How do we put controls around the resources that go into our public cloud? That could be the VMs, that could be the network, that could be the subnets. Do we put locks on those? How do we name, how do we tag, kind of talk through some of that? How do we do auditing and cost reporting? And a big thing that happens later on with a lot of these policies and built into the major cloud platforms is you can automate a lot of these as well. So if we're saying to customers or saying to our customers of IT, hey, we only allowing you to provision into, say, the U.S., and you can use the North Central region and the South Central region, how do we enforce that as code into our policy engine to say, okay, if somebody tries to provision something, say, in Europe, they just can't do it. It's going to restrict them straight away.
I think this is also an area where we've seen a lot of integration into other systems within the enterprise, like a ServiceNow, for controlling, provisioning, and governing, the workloads within the enterprise.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, ServiceNow has a portal. It's your change system. It's your CMDB today. They go together. They complement each other. If we're going to go and tag, to Eric's point, if we're going to tag everything in Azure or AWS, well, that's great that we've recorded the information there, but we have an enterprise, inventory system. How do we keep that up to date at the same time? And if you think of these last three, you see we've hit governance, now we're going to hit operations monitoring, and then systems management and automation. If you look at the top 8 there, a lot of those are about getting your cloud up and running. And these bottom 3 are also about, how do we keep it healthy? Again, to that point of, I don't want to do the cloud reboot, and a lot of that's because people do the top 8, bubbles, circles there, whatever you want to call them, but now we need to make sure we do governance. And this one, I think is at the heart of a lot of my conversations with customers now is operations and monitoring. If we can't enable the team to say, what do I do when a ticket comes in, who gets that alert? What do they do with it? Who gets the on-call, response to that? You have to have a plan for your specific environment. In addition to that, we have to have troubleshooting procedures as well. So, if I get that alert and I get that ticket, what is the new playbook, right? What's my standard operating procedures? In VMware, you might say I log in and I move this to a more healthy host, or, I reboot that VM. What do I do? You need to have that same level of playbook to be extremely successful here. And as Eric said there, ServiceNow ITSM processes a knowledge-based enablement as well. ServiceNow and your ITIL tools have a knowledge base where you can take all of these operating procedures and put them directly in there. That way, when that incident comes in, no one's going around looking for the Word document or which is completely out of date. Having a centralized knowledge base that you can use is critical to some of that as well. And those monitoring techniques go beyond just infrastructure. I think that's something I like to reinforce over and over is, there's application monitoring tools, whether you're using App Dynamics, whether you're using something more native to the cloud, like, in Azure we have Application Insights. These are all part of the same puzzle which we're trying to complete here to say, okay, is this healthy, is it not healthy? We go on to the next one, systems management and automation. And this one we'll spend a little bit of time on here because I think this is key from the biggest skill shift that people have moving to the public cloud is transitioning from, hey, I used to go into VMware, or I'm happy going into a portal and doing something. How am I going to do that in a completely automated way? And there's a lot of tools in the space. There's a lot of confusion in the space. And I'd be curious if, anybody has questions here, send them in, if you've got particular questions around automation tools. But to give you an example, when we build things on premises, we do a lot of automation and orchestration today. And by that, I mean, we might go and connect to a load balancer with a workflow. We might provision a VM, clone a VM template that is, then configure monitoring. Maybe we had a workflow that gave us a server name to begin with. But all of these are individual modules that go out and connect to various systems on premises. And then we might say, okay, I want to back up that VM, or I want to replicate it, and things like that. And again, that's more of like I'm stitching together a bunch of scripts or REST calls and things like that. In the public cloud, it's just a little bit different because I can define everything as code. So when we think of infrastructure as code, while it's possible to do on premises, it's very hard to do on premises. It's significantly easier to do in the public cloud because Azure provides ARM templates, Amazon provides CloudFormation templates. I can define everything in those and deploy an entire stack. So when you see there, we have this piece of core automation is what's my template creation for an N-tier stack, So I decided one of the first things as part of my recommended application architectures is, okay, I've built this app, I've worked with the business, this is something I want to deploy over and over again. How do I turn that into the ARM template or into the CloudFormation template so I can do that again and again? The problem then is the next challenge comes is, well, how do I now control all of that code, right? What's my code control process? Am I using GitHub today? Are my application teams using any kind of code control mechanism today? Well, how do I evolve that and take some of those lessons learned from the app side? Now I'm defining everything as code. How do we do that today? And that's a bit of a shift for a lot of people if they haven't used GitHub or check something in there for the first time. Then you'll see also there's configuration management integration with, say, Puppet or Chef. Or it could be PowerShell DSC, Ansible, some of the other tools that are out there. If we think back to virtual machines, and let's say we've done a lot of infrastructure as code and automation, we've got to the point where we've built a VM in, say, Azure or AWS, we've configured the network, the subnet, everything like that, but we still have to configure everything inside of the operating system itself. So what's our handoff from automating the complete infrastructure deployment to those other tools? And these principles apply whether it's on-premises or public cloud. So there's a lot of value to be gained by, immediately working on, configuration management. And that's the core automation piece over there. If we look at the right and left of that, like the automation techniques, you kind of shift to operational automation as well. How do I ensure that at 6 o'clock every day, dev test VMs power off if nobody's using them? Remember, we're paying, per the minute for a lot of these services. How do I automate that? And again, how does that integrate with my change control system to, inform us that, okay, this happened, this automated event happened, a person didn't execute it, but we need to know that it happened, and so a change control needs to be created. And then on the left side there as well, how do we manage all these images? Application developers aren't going to just have one VM template that we used to. We see this shift towards immutable architectures. How do I patch and maintain my image as well? And so, this piece in itself is just core and, is a big shift for a lot of people to kind of hit on.
So while we transition back to Eric, maybe one question came in, Nick, for you that I think is relevant, and that is, okay, across these 11 pillars, the foundation, as you call it, what's the most, the typical greatest challenge that our clients are running into across the 11?
Yeah, sure. I'll give my answer. I'm curious on Eric's thought as well. I'd say one of the biggest challenges is one that people don't think they have, which is back to around education. If you're not educated enough on what's possible in the cloud, you probably don't realize how you could have architected that service. So you might go in and build a standard, N-tier VM type application, and you could have used a whole host of other services. You might go ahead and continue to leverage a lot of your on-premises login tools and your whole engagement to kind of get up and running. The business is saying, hey, I want this app up and running very quickly, but they don't want to wait for 6-9 months for us to look at every single tool and make sure it can monitor and manage the public cloud. There are so many tools that are native to the public cloud, like just monitoring as an example. Maybe there's a longer-term plan to go in and get in a more holistic monitoring enterprise tool, but I can use Azure Monitor. I can use CloudWatch alarms from AWS immediately and get up and running. Those metrics, the public cloud providers feed you a lot of easy buttons today, and just knowing that they're out there, I think, is critical. So I would still say the greatest challenge, aside from the difficulties in all the pillars, is just making sure you're educated and that you have that process to continuously be educated, or else, the things changing all the time. So if you want to add anything, Eric?
Yeah, I would just agree, and I would also say that it's not only getting educated, but it's putting the right people within your organization in place and empowering them to make changes and deliver around the goals that you establish as an organization. And the technology is there to leverage, and we'll talk about this in the 8 lessons in a second, but it's really about enabling people to get done what they need to accomplish and removing barriers within the organization. So I think with that, we'll go into the 8 lessons learned, and there's certainly probably more than 8, but these are the top ones that we kind of see repeatedly. And I think, as we talked about earlier, you need a plan. So whether, you think you understand the platform and the technology and have the right people and charter in place, I think establishing a plan is really critical. But the reason you need to establish that plan is to align people and put a vision in place for your organization. Know that that plan will likely be wrong, as Nick just said. You're going to learn, your team's going to learn, and that plan's going to evolve. But at least setting directional guidance in terms of where you're going is really critical. Second is really big bang efforts don't work. Small iterative ones do. So when clients, want to take a year to release, their first, foray into the public cloud, we believe that's, a recipe for disaster. We really want to start out with small wins that show progress within the organization.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I was actually with a client, yesterday out of North Carolina, and just talking to them about this. We took the entire engagement that we're working with them on in the public cloud and broke it down into the small wins. So at each phase, whether I'm automating a SQL deployment, whether I'm automating a VM deployment, then I'm adding the load balancer, now I can deploy the whole stack, now security can monitor and then look at it. This was key to, not making, again, that engagement last, 9, 10 months to, because we end up in this analysis paralysis phase, but getting those small wins and back, this kind of funnels back into the education, right? I got the win, we built this thing, whatever the small piece is, we've automated it, now it gets communicated back and educated back to the team, so we know we can use that for the next project and the next project and the next project as well. And, I just couldn't agree more with this. There's wins to be had all along the way, and those wins can be weeks, days, as opposed to months and years.
Great. Third one is, and we've obviously talked about this one a bit, it's about the people and outcomes, not the technology. As technologists, we often get wrapped around, I want to use this service or this function or this capability, but really it comes back to the people and the business outcomes that we want to drive. At the end of the day, the technology is there to support us. We need to choose the right people to make the right progress, to drive the right business outcomes for these initiatives. The fourth one is, this is about your cloud, make it about your business. And really what I mean by this is, let's not get wrapped around, I'm moving my workload to, X cloud or Y provider. We need to make this about, once again, where we're trying to head as an organization. And back to my first slide in this presentation, what is the driver? Are we trying to innovate? Are we trying to reduce costs? Are we trying to do both? We need to make this about the business outcomes, not the technology or provider that we're using. Next one is understand your applications and their dependencies. This journey becomes very difficult if we don't understand applications, architectures, and their interdependencies. As people living in large, complex enterprise organizations, we know these things are tightly wedded together in most cases, many application interdependencies, and many times the people that created these applications are no longer with us. So in order to move applications, in order to re-architect applications, we need to really understand how they're built, and that's a key part of this journey. And if you don't understand them, the journey is going to become more difficult. Next one is automate cost controls, compliance, and security. Each of the cloud providers has a set of best practices. AWS, for instance, has the well-architected framework. This is something that is not a point-in-time event that you have to align yourself to. it's something that has to be, dealt with on a continuous basis. And there are many managed services that can provide capabilities around cost control, compliance, and security. AHEAD has such a managed service called CoPilot, but these really need to be thought about and built into your platform and dealt with on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, I'll just add that, this is one of these areas that, gets in the way, but, you can argue that, well, it should get in the way, right, from a security, governance, and compliance standpoint. But going back to, we look at lesson 2 there, big bang efforts don't work, small iterative ones do. We don't want to say, okay, because we have to do this whole giant security, compliance, and cost control thing up front, that has to get in the way. And when we get down to it, when we look at automating cost controls, compliance, and security, there are so many frameworks out there that you can just adhere to and follow. Amazon has the framework, as Eric mentioned. Azure, Microsoft has the framework for Azure. And it is possible with all these managed services and tooling out there to just automate this problem away, that can meet those regulatory requirements.
So 2 more lessons, and then we'll take questions. This is a really important one. Market your efforts and celebrate your wins. We really advocate this with our clients. You're iterating on this platform. You're building successive wins throughout the organization. But we have to tell, the business and the general IT community within most organizations what we've built, what the capabilities are, and we want to celebrate those because if we don't educate the masses within our organizations about what we're doing, they'll tend to go around, IT and build their own functionality or their own platform or their own accounts and services. And we really need to centralize this, not from a control perspective, but there's just a lot of leverage that, organizations get, and really celebrating the wins. And from a team perspective and an organization perspective, marketing this journey is really key. And then speaking of the journey, despite, some people's beliefs, there isn't a single path to solving, the problems of driving innovation and reducing costs at the end of the day. There are multiple ways to get there. And, you need to drive this journey based on your requirements that's mapped to your business needs. And we believe there's some key foundational elements that we've gone over at a really high level today. But we believe we've kind of got a very flexible model to be able to drive this type of journey with customers. But don't believe there's only one way to do it. There's variations. And I think that, flexibility and finding the right path for you is all about mapping back requirements and needs for your organization.
Okay, well, thanks, guys. We had a couple of questions that came in while you were speaking, so let's start with one that's pretty specific. Someone out there is dealing with a multi-cloud or considering a multi-cloud strategy, and the question is, considering Amazon, AWS, and Azure, do you do them in parallel? Do you do one at a time? Can you talk a little bit about that?
So I think our general recommendation, and I'll maybe speak for both of us, but Nick can feel free to chime in, is that both of them are very capable platforms. One's, just as good to start with as the other for most use cases. And our recommendation is start with one, get good at it, get educated with it, build the right foundation, and then figure out what the use cases are for the next one. Trying to go head first into both platforms simultaneously typically doesn't yield, better results and doesn't allow you guys, our clients, to move faster. So I think we just have to be careful and cautious about, taking too much on. We want those wins and we want to show progress.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is, the team that you decide to assemble as your cloud team and the people that are going to be engineering and, operating, whether it's Azure or AWS, I'd say just to validate what Eric said is have those people start taking certifications, whether that's the AWS Associate certification or the Microsoft 7533 Azure certification. Just see how long it takes them to get through that, how much education they're going to do, and I think that'll be eye-opening in itself. Certainly longer term, come back if you feel there's a specific use case that you need the other cloud for. But I totally agree with Eric. It's a ramp up, and there's an education ramp there, whether it's Azure or AWS. It's better to be really good at one of them than not very good at either of them. So.
And as a follow-up, Nick, the 11 pillars, are they fairly uniform across both platforms, or can you speak to where the greatest deltas are between the two?
Yeah, and I can sort of talk to how those came to be, right? So there's two frameworks out there. You know, Amazon has their well-architected framework, Microsoft has their cloud adoption framework, and ultimately, as we went out to clients, you know, we looked at both of those frameworks and took the best of both worlds plus what we'd learned in the field, and we're like, these are the 11 things that we're seeing resonating. And back to one of those points earlier of how do I avoid the reboot? And that's why there's been so much work put in from us on operations monitoring, governance, security, and particularly that systems management and automation piece, because we don't want you to just build a cloud, get it up and running, put your app there. We want it to be maintained, cost optimized. We want it to be a well-oiled machine. And so those 11 pillars, yeah, they absolutely apply to AWS and Azure. You know, we discussed as Google's up and coming in the world today. You know, it'll apply to Google Cloud as well. As long as the public cloud provider, we have an answer for those 11 pillars for the public cloud provider, I think you could safely operate and manage a public cloud.
Okay. And one question another one came in from an attendee, and that is there a specific grouping or ordering to the 11 pillars that a team should consider when trying to address them all?
Yeah, so the order is, I'll tell you quite honestly, is a debate we've had over and over again on what's the correct order to flow through. And so we do juggle it around a little bit depending on audience and the application, things like that. That order we've come with, though, is by design. So when you look at those first ones, it's, you know, the education, the current state, the account structure, the network, getting, you know, the foundational VMs and storage up and running, because we know those are fundamental parts. We wait till we've got more information on the application before we go into all the security and the identity management and pieces after that, because we want to know more about how we're going to architect the app, because that then informs, and we found changed a lot of those decisions we made around the infrastructure. So yeah, those first 8 are definitely in order there, and then the last 3 are all about operating, managing, ensuring we have governance, systems management, automation around the public cloud provider.
Okay. Thanks for that. So the final question that came in is from someone who's clearly in the camp of they're not yet on the public cloud journey, but they're considering the journey. And the question is there one thing that I should tell my team to get started, maybe besides just getting educated, which is a key first pillar, but one thing we should tell my team to get started, what would that be? Maybe each of you can take a stab at that.
Sure. The first one I would think is, well, what's your use case, right? Well, understand the business and get closer to the business themselves, right? What is the application we're trying to, I mean, why are we even trying to go here? I think just understanding that is important, you know, beyond just being educated. I think they go together, right? You know, knowing what's possible and then knowing what your business needs are is going to allow you to kind of marry the two of those together. If I'm being more specific, in the, you know, if we talk about those 11 pillars, where I get started, like, just, do you even have an account with Microsoft or Amazon, right? You may already have one out there. Somebody may already be doing this out there in your organization. They may have swiped a credit card already. I think knowing where you actually are is so important in the space. So.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I tell clients a lot when they ask, you know, what should we tell our team as we embark on this journey, it's that, you know, this change is upon us. We have to embrace change, and, you know, that's for some people very difficult, depending on who they are, where they are in their career, what their skills are. But, you know, I think at the end of the journey, I should say the journey doesn't end, but the end of a lot of, you know, these engagements where we've made progress and helped customers adopt the public cloud, you know, the change has been good not only for each person as an individual on the team, but for the organization as a whole. So, you know, I would just overemphasize the mantra of embracing change, and that, you know, the leadership and the executive sponsorship of the organization and the initiative is going to support this change and the skill development and the career development, and, you know, be there in a supportive manner.
Okay. Well, thanks, gentlemen. That's all the questions we had come in. So as Eric mentioned, everybody, we help clients at all phases of the cloud journey, from strategy setting to getting the right foundation around those 11 pillars to ongoing monitoring and optimization through our CoPilot managed service. If anyone out there is interested in having a more in-depth discussion on this topic, we encourage you to set up a briefing through your account executive or request one online at thinkahead.com. You can find our entire briefing catalog online on our website. Once again, everybody, we recorded this webinar. We'll be sure to send around a link in our post-event follow-up. And in fact, as you close out of the webinar, we'll display a very short survey. We'd really appreciate you taking that 1 minute necessary to complete the survey so we can always improve these experiences. And thanks again, everybody, and have a fantastic day. Take care.